There you go, Sean. It's all yours.
Great. Thanks, Marty. And thanks to all of you for being here. I'm really excited and super nervous to talk to you about PK this weekend. And the title of this is PK for Everyone, an Experience of Mind. And it might just seem strange, that phrase, PK for everyone, because isn't it something that's just for those odd people out there who can do special things? And this type of PK that I've been working with for 5 years and teaching people really is for everyone. It shows that if you're alive and breathing and your consciousness is functional, you can cause an effect on your environment and cause physical effects as well. So, and when it says an experience of mind in the title, mind here is so narrow, but what I'm really pointing to is that this is a lot bigger than just, thinking, oh, I'm going to make something move and make it happen. This is really about the whole person. It's about our emotions. It's about our belief systems. It's about our stress and relaxation and our intention, attention, and expectation. As I go through my presentation, you'll see so many similarities between PK and remote viewing in terms of how we need to be to produce an effect or to gain the information that we're looking for during a session. I'm so sorry, I'm really a meditation teacher at heart, and when I start speaking for more than 30 seconds, people start falling asleep, which is really a great condition for psychic abilities, but to try and send you information is not so great. This is just me at about 7 years old. I'm the kid with the dark hair and the bowl cut. And this is a formative age in my life because around this time I had appendicitis and extreme pain, and eventually I ended up in the hospital and they took out my appendix, and that's when I started wondering what happens after we die. I'd never suffered so much pain than those few days, and never been so afraid in retrospect, realizing, wow, this could have turned out differently. They told me that my appendix ruptured in the surgeon's hand as he was taking it out of me. So that's really, I think, what kicked off my spiritual journey. And I'm sure I'm not the only one in this room that you're here for remote viewing for sure, but maybe there's some part of you, that spiritual part of you, that's looking for answers about the bigger questions about life. And I firmly believe that remote viewing and PK are ways of gaining information to help find those answers. So going to my teenage years, my father worked for a corporation that transferred us around, so we spent a couple years in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and we lived pretty close to the beach. And I remember one night that took my spiritual search further. I was with a young friend of mine who's a couple years younger than me, and so we were just kids, and we had one boogie board between us, and we were on the beach at night, and it looked a little bit like it does here. The big, beautiful full moon over the ocean, and the waves didn't seem so bad, so we thought, let's go out into the ocean and play. It'll be okay. And we just kept our eyes out on the horizon as we were playing in the waves and hanging on the boogie board and floating around. And I don't know how much time passed, but at a certain point, we ended up turning around and looking at the beach, which seemed to be miles and miles away from us. That's just how it seemed. I don't really think it was that bad, but that's how it felt. And I could see my apartment building, and where it started right in front, but when we turned around, it was over there. So we were being swept down and out to sea. And even looking back at the beach, we could see the rise and fall of these massive waves. So I knew that there were some hurdles to get through to get back on dry land. And so we kicked and kicked and kicked, and we were exhausted and cold in the water and really, really scared. And we had to trade who got to float on the boogie board versus who got to pull on the cord and try and drag ourselves back to land. And we just seemed to get further and further out into the ocean, getting more and more scared. And the thing is, I was raised in a Catholic family, and my buddy and I, we went to the same church, so we had, you always find religion in a foxhole. Well, I had religion, but I was actually going to start using it at this moment, and we decided to do some praying together. Just doing all the prayers that good Catholics know, like the Hail Mary and the Our Father. Just repeating them over and over again. Scared. I guess this is an example of theurgy, trying to use PK going through God. And I really use the word God loosely these days, but I think that word still serves a function. So we're praying to a greater being to come down and affect material reality to save our little butts. And after a few rounds of prayer out loud, this wave came up behind us and pushed us forward. I felt a wave of relief come over me because we were really tired. And we kept praying louder and louder, and more waves came behind us and pushed us forward. And finally a really big wave came, and we caught the wave, and we sort of body surfed our way and tumbled into the sand. Alive! And we were really, really happy and scared to death what my parents were going to say if they found out. But only a few weeks later, I was watching a program about waves and riptides and the ocean, and found out that if you ever get stuck in a riptide, you don't want to fight it and kick against it, which is what we were doing, but you sort of want to go with it, because they always naturally tend to send things back toward land anyway. And at that moment, I just lost all faith. I was like, oh my God, I thought maybe something special had happened and someone came along to save us and someone had answered my prayers, but in the end it was just nature. It was going to happen anyway. And that's when the first seeds of doubt about non-physical reality came into my mind. And I started asking more questions about religion and belief systems and things like that. Don't be scared as you hear this if you have belief systems, because I go back and forth all my life on belief systems, and I'm still, I have not come to any conclusions. So you can keep whatever belief systems you have. They're not going to be threatened here. But mine was certainly threatened, and I was always a stubborn person. I never satisfied really being told what to believe. And this was another close call, maybe a dramatic call with death. And I didn't want to be told what to believe anymore. I wanted to find my own answers. And right around that time, this is in the 80s, I came across the book Journeys Out of the Body by Robert Monroe. I'm sure many people here know that book. And it was a beautiful, inspiring account of Robert Monroe's experiences of having out-of-body experiences. And I was looking for a way to have that for myself, because if I could prove to myself that I'm a non-physical being, or at least some part of me is non-physical, then that part of me may possibly or probably exist after the demise of my physical body. To me, that would relieve a lot of stress about what happens when we die and afterward. But that book, unfortunately, he was a great writer, great stories, but that book itself isn't great on how to do the out-of-body experience. I tried. I can remember so many nights laying in bed, listening to the ocean off in the distance, playing some Pink Floyd in the background, and that song Learning to Fly, and just listening to that and letting the thrill of the music tickle my spine and feeling those tingly sensations, but nothing would happen. And eventually I gave up and just kept going to church, a good member of my family, and just kept going that way. In my 20s, I did discover Buddhism. Even though I already knew about it, I started going to a place to practice Buddhism because I thought, maybe here's a way I can find answers for myself if I meditate. There'll be one way to explore consciousness in my mind, and maybe I'll have some interesting experiences that way. And this was particular to Tibetan Buddhism. That's what I was studying. And I'd had a couple different teachers over the years. But in the end, I found something to be true, that I think any tradition after 2 generations sort of becomes codified, systematized. And I realized after about 20 years of practicing Tibetan Buddhism that even though I'd come to it wanting to find out what happens when we die, when you step into another tradition or another religion or organization, you sort of naturally adopt what they say the goals of the spiritual pursuit are. So, and I think this is across the board, whether you're Catholic or some other type of Christian or Jewish or Hindu or Muslim and Buddhist. In Buddhism, there's the Four Noble Truths. That's the first thing you remember, that you memorize. Life is suffering. And then everything goes from there. You know, those are the standard things. And so I sort of took all that on and set my pursuit of the afterlife aside, even though Buddhism does have its own ideas about what happens afterward in reincarnation, but it's still, you sort of absorb what you're told. But after 20-some years of that, I realized I had gotten nowhere in my spiritual quest and what I really wanted to find out. And decided to leave, to abandon that, which is really scary because it kind of means ostracizing yourself from your community. Maybe I'm not the only black sheep in this room. There's some hands going up there. It's very brave to take the step to explore the woo-woo side of life, because most of our friends and family just aren't into it, right? So welcome, black sheep. And I found during that time that some other books and resources have come to light about how to have the out-of-body experience. And I was really lucky to find William Buellman's works in particular, and his books are really great for instructions. And after training myself for 13 weeks, really in a strong way, training 2 or 3 sessions a day, I finally had an out-of-body experience. And to be clear, this is just an artistic rendering. You never know, so just let it say it. Because this is actually not at all what an out-of-body experience is like in my experience. It can be like that, but it's a big world leaving the body. We're disassociating from it anyway. But 13 weeks of training, and I had it, and my first time when I left, the first thing that I felt after coming back into my body was an absolute absence of fear of death. Just complete relief. The first thing I did when I came back to my body and felt that feeling, I went back to my bedroom, because I'd been training in the living room frequently at 3 o'clock in the morning. I went back to the bedroom, slipped into bed with my wife, and she stirred, and I said, honey, I did it. And inside I was just screaming out loud, I did it! I solved that thing that I've been trying to solve all my life. By then I'd also been teaching meditation to students in Denver for a long time, and I thought, I can't really show them what an out-of-body experience is. I could show them this photo, but that's not going to cut it. And the closest I could show them was me laying on a couch. That's just not good enough. So I thought, is there some other way that I can show people that there is some part of us that really is non-physical? And I realized that PK could be a way to do that. Is there something in us that extends beyond the body? And I don't mean that literally, but is there some part of us that's not just skin and bones or that fits within these limits, but do we go beyond, or are we more than just this? When we look at each other in this room now, are we really looking at an interesting mirror of ourselves? Are we the same person at the deepest level, or are we all part of the same UCC, right? So I started looking online, and of course, anyone who looks up PK online, they'll immediately meet this person. So this is Nina Kulagina during the Cold War. She's a Russian psychic who could do PK. This is just one example of the things she could do. That she's moving a matchbox and some matches inside of this plexiglass container using her intention and bodily energy. So clearly, whoever she is, she's not just inside the envelope of skin that's wrapped around her body. That's pretty amazing, right? And I've seen other people online who could do similar things. Now, the thing about Nina Kulagina is that they reported that during her sessions, which would take 8 hours at a time, she would lose many pounds of weight. And her arms and legs and other parts of her body would be in extreme pain for days afterward. and she ended up dying of a heart attack. And I found another young man a couple years ago. I saw him online, named Fatih Mir. I think that's how to pronounce his name, from Turkey. He could do other amazing things, and then I found out that he died of a simultaneous heart attack and aneurysm. So I thought, this is not the way I want to go about things. I had heart surgery or heart procedure at age 25, and the last thing I wanted to do was to hurt myself trying to move things with my mind. And being a meditator, I thought I could find a more subtle way. Also online, I found Shirley Black. She's someone who's had several near-death experiences in her life and who's experienced a lot of PK, including large kitchen appliances moving across her kitchen and other things like that. But in this presentation that I found on YouTube, she displayed this type of PK. And many of you have seen this, a little silver foil in some shape balanced on a needle, and this is what you're going to be learning to do this weekend with me. She's just placing her hand near it and somehow causing movement to happen. And you'll see here that it starts speeding up. And of course, the first thing that people think is, oh, it's just wind in the room, or the wind bouncing off her hand, or heat from the hand. And we'll talk about heat a lot more over the weekend. But here in a moment, she's going to screw on the cover, and you'll see that the effect still continues. And one thing I want you to notice is that it actually starts reversing direction here. And that's something that you'll experience yourself during our PK experiments that we do together. So I decided this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to learn how to do this and then teach it to my meditation students to show them that we are more than just physical beings. The meditation can be about more than just relaxing or stress reduction. And so this is just an example of many, many sessions. And you see the clock speeding up here. That's 21 minutes, 22 minutes, and it goes all the way to close to an hour. And so every day for 2.5 months, I'd sit in front of this thing for 45 minutes or an hour at a time. And you see that's a little piece of paper folded inside the glass container, and it would not move. So at a certain point I started wondering if I was just losing my mind, or if this was just, I should just give up. And I didn't give up. And one night as I laid my head down to sleep, in my mind's eye there was this image of the target just moving on the needle. It just spontaneously arose right here in my third eye region, in my mental screen. And it was just a day or two after that when I sat down in front of this thing, and soon enough it started moving. So what that tells me is that something inside of me had to change before my experience in the outer world could change. Is it something about thought patterns, or level of stress, or relaxation, or belief system? I think all of those might be part of it, but definitely chiseling away at this project for 2.5 months, I think had a lot to do with it. So I started doing it more and more and came up with a protocol so that people could learn to do it really quickly. And now I teach this in Denver, and in a 2-hour class, people can do everything that I can do quite easily. And so, for example, the first stage is basically just about forming a relationship with the object. And we can think, maybe there's energy in the body that's reaching out and contacting the object, or maybe our mind is just wrapping itself around the idea of moving an object non-physically. So this is the first stage, and it's basically just putting your hands close to the object without a glass cover, and realizing that at a certain distance, using a special breathing technique that you're going to learn, you actually start affecting the speed and the direction of the movement of the object. Because of course, most of why it's moving right now is the wind in the room. But at a certain point you can tell, hold on, if I relax a little more and I inhale and then hold my breath, it stops moving. And then as I exhale, it starts moving in the opposite direction, or things like that. That a relationship really does start to form. Some form of entanglement, and there's a word that came from Marty's presentation this morning. So entanglement on some level happens. And of course it's not going to be the same thing that scientists do with photons to measure quantum entanglement. But I think the principles have some similarities. And then the next stage is using a glass container to remove the effect of the wind in the room. But now your hands are resting on the glass container. And the way it teaches is it's really still about building a relationship. And having your hands on the glass is sort of like training wheels. Because surely you are heating up the glass and heating up the air inside, and that's fine. It's not a problem. Although this is where pseudo-skeptics step in and say, well, that's all that's happening. It's just heat. But as I'll explain later, there are reasons why it's not just heat. But what we're doing here is kicking up the movement of the air molecules inside a little bit by heating it up. But what's interesting is when I teach this in class, people can do this in just a couple of minutes. But for 2.5 months, I sat in front of the thing doing the same thing, and the object didn't move. Now, could that be that I wasn't heating it up enough? Or could it be sign missing? Some of you might be familiar with that principle. Sign missing is when, let's just say, pseudo-skeptics do a psychic experiment, like an ESP experiment, and not only do they not succeed at it, but they fail stupendously, marvelously. They fail so far in the opposite direction of success that it's clear that they're using psychic means to produce a non-effect, right? So if I was sitting there for 2.5 months and not moving the object, maybe it was my belief system was actually holding it still. And I have other videos where I've taught classes and you see two people and I knew who the skeptics were in the room. They're sitting there with their hands up close and this thing is not moving. And then someone at one table over who's really open-minded, it's moving just fine for them. Then the next stage is to get to where you can move the object with your hands just off the glass. Again, we're still at the level of training wheels, because maybe you're still adding heat into the system, but we're getting a little more distant from it, getting less physical and more mental. The biggest challenge at this point for most people is maintaining a level of relaxation as we get here, because a lot of people start stressing out. They're like, well, if I'm not touching it, can I still do it? You feel this tightness building in the mind, and then the effect will stop, the object will stop moving if you become too tense. So just replaying the scene a little faster so you can see the object moving a little bit more clearly. And it's important, you might be wondering, why am I seeing this on video right now when I'm going to do this in person? Well, there's something about seeing and believing. Just seeing this slowly right now is opening your mind to the possibility that you do extend in space and can influence things somehow. Then the next stage is when it gets really fun. This is the no hands stage. And so there my hands are resting in my lap. And I'm just looking at the object using my eyes in a particular way. There's a way to look at things when you want to affect a change. Just sort of like when you're on a first date, there's a way you can look at the person sitting across from you if you want to affect a change in the way they think about you. There is power in the eyes. And here I am, sitting across the table. And it can get even more fun from that, where you stand up. And this, of course, is all built on the relationship that you form. So you start at the basic level with your hands on the glass, then you take them off the glass for a few minutes, then you put them in your lap, and you're increasing your level of relaxation and your confidence at the same time. And then after a while you stand up and take a couple steps back. And what's interesting here is that sometimes the object stops completely. And that's when the confidence really kicks in, where you can get it moving again from a dead stop. Here's a little bit different. I've got 3 objects here inside of a container. I'm several feet away. And I was experimenting with different types of metals. So these are little pieces of paper coated with silver, gold, and copper foil. I had to use a paper base because those metals are so soft that they would just sink and droop over the needle. But I was wondering, maybe different metals would respond differently to me, and I don't think that they do. I don't think it has anything to do with that. What's interesting about this scene is that different objects are moving at different speeds at different times, so it's not like there's a big whirlpool of convection moving everything together, right? Things are responding differently in their little corners of the container. And then another way of doing this is you can have one object in in its own container and try 3 objects. So the ones on the end, of course, they might be experiencing more turbulence from the heat from my hands, but what happens when the one in the middle starts moving, as we'll see here. And there's something interesting about getting multiple objects to move in different containers, because there's something that I call sticky energy, and I don't think there's really sticky energy involved, but it just describes what happens. You could have 2 objects next to each other and you focus on one and get it to move, and then you let it stop, and then you turn your attention to the one next to it and start applying the same technique. But instead of that one moving, the first one responds instead. What the heck is going on there? It takes time and energy and effort to move the intention of your focus from one object to the other sometimes. And after a while I thought, can I do something heavier, something more significant? Because, you know, after a couple of minutes of seeing paper and tinfoil moving around, it sort of loses its pizzazz, right? Like, it's not like what you see in Hollywood, right? So what if I could move toothpicks? Of course, not like Nina Kalagina, but something more subtle. Here I put them on a scale, 0.29 grams, so they're significantly heavier than a piece of paper tinfoil. I took 2 toothpicks and balanced them on a little piece of cardboard and balanced that on a needle. And you can see here after several minutes, I finally got it to move, and this is with no hands at all. And so you see it turning there slowly. And what you don't see here, but what's actually happening is I started using principles of remote viewing in my PK. Because the thing about toothpicks is that they have dimensionality to them. They're thick compared to a slice of tinfoil, right? So I realized that when I wanted the toothpicks to move, what helped was when I would try and remote view into one of the toothpicks, which is a different experience than the kind of PK that I'd done before. So I'm still using my breathing technique and my level of relaxation and everything, but then I'm trying to remote view into the cellular structure of the wood inside the toothpick. And at that moment, when I felt connected, when I felt like I had connected with the signal line, is another way to say it, that's when the thing would start to move, which is really interesting, because now we're getting into possible connections to remote influencing, right? That's sort of where remote viewing and PK come together, especially if you have nefarious ideas. So in this video, you're going to see me leaving my condo and going to my garage and sitting in my car 10 stories down and moving the object. And this is a long distance experiment, and I thought it'd be easier for me to run you through it as we watch the video together. And in this video, it begins by showing an outside view of my building. So I live on the 10th floor of this condominium complex at the very top. And as you see, as the camera pans to the right, that's a garage there on the right. And so in this experiment, I'm upstairs on the 10th floor with 2 cameras, and I'm just sitting down now by the object, and I've got my hands on either side of the glass but not touching it. I'm just forming a connection with the object. And so as soon as it starts to move a little bit, I know I'm connected. And then what I'm going to do is just stand up, grab one of the cameras, and go down the hallway, take the elevator down, and go to the garage and go inside my car. And without seeing the object from there, I don't have a camera back on the object that I can see. I'm just using my imagination and my intention and trying to do a little remote viewing. I'm going to try and move it from that distance. So here you see me in the elevator headed down, and I'm going to end it here. I'm going to step out as you continue watching the video and see what happens. And if you want to learn how to do this, you can. So you know how to find me and my resources at mindpossible.com, but enjoy the rest of this video. Okay, so I go sit inside my car, and I just had a camera on me, and part of it is because I wanted to also see when I had my eyes open or closed, because I was experimenting with different kinds of remote viewing there, because there's that idea that maybe you're reaching a certain brain wave, like alpha, when you close your eyes, that maybe that allows for too much imaginary information to come through. So these are all questions I have as a remote viewing student. But I was wondering if my eyes are open or closed when I'm trying to perceive the object and send my intention to it, which is more effective. But we see here, so this is real this time is linked up. The object upstairs in my dining room, and then me in my car. My eyes are closed. I'm just trying to remember what it looks like and trying to imagine being just inside the foil or just right next to the foil and being with it. Just trying to invigorate my connection to it. There we go, eyes open, and then it starts responding. Eyes closed, it was responding then too. So I don't have an answer for that question, which works better for remote influencing, eyes open or closed. I don't know yet. Okay, well. So the basic formula for this type of PK is TRIUM, time plus relaxation plus intention plus attention equals movement. And really, isn't this the formula for every kind of, or for most, or many kinds of psychic phenomena? I should add expectation then for the remote viewing, right? And I think that's where the confidence comes in with PK, that once your expectation is met, or when you have the expectation, it's a mark of your confidence, which of course leads to further relaxation. When you know it's going to happen, you relax more deeply, and then you produce the effect. So that's a simple formula, which is good for everyone to remember, because when we try too hard or when we rush the process, what happens? Well, in remote viewing, you either draw a blank or you start making stuff up, right? So my friend and collaborator in Denver, his name is Damon Abraham, and he's a great guy, and he's done a lot of research using random number generators or random event generators. I'll just refer to it in that way. I'll call them a REG. And is everyone here familiar with what a random event generator is and how it works? Especially if you've seen those videos or read the books about the Global Consciousness Project, measuring the effects on random event generators, for example, during 9/11 or during other significant historical events, that something happens with human consciousness. Well, what Damon did was he came when I was teaching one of these classes with about 8 people doing PK together. And he brought a random event generator with him to start charting it. And what we see here is an example of different stages of one of the workshops. And we see that the REG is starting to produce non-random data during certain points. So I'm just going to refer to the left side of this chart here. When we see the green section where it starts leaving non-significant regions of the chart, that's where we all turned around our glass containers and placed them on the table at the same time. So it marks this moment when these 8 people, 6 or 8 people, all started getting serious about the PK class. Okay, now we're going to do it. They'd just done the stage where you're just putting your hands in the air, but the air in the room is moving it. This is, okay, something's about to happen. And the REG recorded that. Later on in that class, we did an experiment using FaceTime, which is something you can do at home. If you have 2 cell phones, you can turn on the FaceTime application, video conferencing, and leave one right in front of the target while it's under glass, and go to another room and look at it on your phone, and do the same technique that you're going to learn here. And if you can stay relaxed, you'll get it to move that way. And of course, what is the phone in your hand doing? Are you really sending anything through the phone? Of course not. It's just a symbolic representation of reality, right? Of course, I think everything we're looking at right now is a symbolic representation of reality. At one point, we did an exercise where the group of the whole class were trying to move 3 objects at the same time inside of a container. And when we decided to do that, see, somehow the chart had moved down back into randomness, but we turned the glass over the 3 objects, and we see that an effect started to be recorded, that the chart starts changing in an upward direction. And I remember what happened to stop this. You see the arrow saying lapse in consciousness, or actually that's lapse in concentration, was someone cracked a joke. And we were all exhausted, and everyone just started laughing, and their concentration was dispersed. And you see that it went back into randomness right after that. So it's interesting that it's not just between you and the target that you're trying to move, but there's something in the air, right? There's something in the UCC that's happening that's recordable using random event generators. So are we really moving in this type of PK? Are we really moving the object directly? That's what I thought for a good long time, that somehow I'm beaming energy to it and making it turn on the needle. But thankfully, I was in touch with Dean Radin and John Valentino. They've both done a lot of work with random event generators and other things. And in different ways, they suggest that what could be happening is that I'm affecting the movement of the air molecules inside of the container. And at first I was a little bit insulted, like, oh damn, I'm not really doing what I think I'm doing. And it seems so much less sexy to think I'm changing the way air molecules are moving. This is called Brownian motion, right? All the molecules inside the container are bouncing off of each other in random ways, causing an equal distribution of pressure throughout the container, right? Sort of like this. Just little molecules bouncing off each other randomly, and that's entropy. Entropy doesn't require any extra energy. You see a dried up leaf on the ground falling apart, disintegrating, requires no energy. It's a release of energy, it's a letting go. It takes nothing but time, right? But what could be happening during this type of PK is this, coherence and syntropy. So here, that's my cute little video to indicate the air molecules moving together. So somehow my mind, I'll just keep letting that play, but somehow my mind is maybe connecting with the UCC, and the UCC is coming back and communicating with the air molecules inside the container, getting them to become coherent in their motion and maybe in their speed, I don't know, and pushing against the object, getting it to move. Which would be interesting if we go back to the video of Nina Kolagina moving that book of matches inside the container. Was she really moving it directly, or were the air molecules inside actually ganging up and pushing against it? Because if you think about all that energy available, if it's all placed in one direction at the same time, it could be quite powerful. The thing about the opposite of entropy or syntropy is that it requires a little bit of extra energy. If you want to grow a plant, you don't just put a seed in the dirt and expect it to grow. You need something extra, a little bit of sunlight, a little bit of moisture. And so perhaps that little bit of extra that's happening when we're moving these objects with our mind is what's coming through the UCC, and coming from our personal consciousness. That's that little bit of extra. So even though heat might be at play here when we're moving the object inside the glass containers, there's that little bit of extra that gets it to change direction when you want it to change direction. Or some people are good at making the object stop on command, or once it's stopped, can you get it going again? There's that little extra kick. That's that little bit of you entering the system, that little bit of energy, perhaps. I really dislike belief systems, so I always end everything I say with perhaps or maybe or I'm not sure. So thoroughly dissatisfying, I'm sure. So here's just another example of multiple containers, and showing that if it really was just heat, then the object closest to me should be moving the most, and maybe it is here, but sometimes the furthest object from me is moving the most, and sometimes they sit still while the object in the middle is moving. And that has to do with my focus. Sometimes I start with the one near me, and then I extend my eyesight beyond. Here's another example. There's a target inside two containers, and then a target above it. So that's only shielded by one layer of glass. But you can see by using my technique, I got each one of them to move. There we go. These might not look like very exciting examples, but there's something that happens when I turn on the video cameras during a PK session. Is the effect just goes to nothing. It just becomes weaker. Why? Because of my big fat ego, right? I'm trying to do a good job. I want to get it on video. I want to show people, and that induces a certain level of tension in the mind, and then things just don't work out. A friend of mine came out from Texas to film a documentary on this, and he spent a whole day with me, and I just did so miserably, knowing that this would be in a documentary someday. It was just so embarrassing. Okay, so this goes back to the idea that what we're doing is actually changing the movement of the air molecules inside the container. And if you want to go surfing, you need moving water. Otherwise, if all you have is that paddle, to stir up the ocean enough to produce the waves takes an awful lot of energy. So it's okay that we might be heating up the container, we're getting the air started, but it's within that motion that we can get some strange effects to happen. Okay, something happened a few weeks ago. I went to Portland, and my Portland friends can start chuckling now once they see this video, to spend some time with some researchers who really wanted to get at the bottom of what was happening. And the first day there, I taught them how to do my style of PK, and we all had a great time. Everyone was moving it. One of them was in another room moving the object. It was beautiful. But then that night I was staying with one of them, and we went back to his house where he had a special thermometer inside the container and a graph there on the computer screen. So we could see the temperature rise and fall inside the container as I used my technique. And as soon as I put my hands on the glass, we could see the temperature rising and then the object moving. And here I am thinking, well, I'm going to show them what PK is. And now I was thinking, oh my God, maybe we're going to discover that PK doesn't exist. And maybe I've been fooling myself for 5 years and teaching hundreds, if not more people, how to fool themselves into thinking that PK is actually happening. Needless to say, my level of stress and freaking out was through the roof. And meanwhile, I have my friend, the scientist, sitting next to me going, come on, let's look at the data. Look, there's the thermometer, there's the temperature's rising again. And when you take your hands away, the temperature falls. And what's happening inside looked like completely random motion. And the worst part is I still had 5 days left in Portland. We were supposed to be doing this PK together, and I just wanted to get on a plane and fly home and make some sort of public statement. Oh, this is all BS. And I didn't touch PK until last week, actually, to prepare for this. And I thought, I need to find something. I need to find what that little extra is. I need to be sure that there is some actual psychokinesis happening. And so I did something that I'd done a couple of years ago, but I hadn't thought about it in a while. And I used the Muse headset to read the EEG signal off my cranium. And I wanted to see, is there a difference between when I'm successfully moving the object and when the object isn't moving? And I think I captured something. So what you see here, I'm going to start playing in a moment, is I'm putting on the headset, and on the left is a close-up of the object. And on the right, that's a close-up of my iPhone that has the app that reads the EEG. And it's going to pick up my delta waves, theta, alpha, beta, and gamma. And I don't really know enough about neurology to know what's really being measured here, but what I was looking for was a difference, just some difference, that the mind does behave differently when I'm successful at moving it versus when I'm not successful at moving it. And in this experiment, I do what you saw in that slide of the man on the paddleboard with a paddle and his little dog. No waves, no movement. So I'm doing a dry start here. I didn't start by touching the glass first. I thought, this is going to be great. I'm going to try and get it to move without any external influence. So I'm sitting behind it. I'm perhaps 18 inches from the glass, and it's going to be about 6 minutes before I succeed at moving it, which tells me this isn't about just heat at this point. So just to prepare you, I'm just going to let this play all the way through. We're going to see different versions of the data. You're going to see the charts side by side. And one thing I want you to notice is at a certain point, you're going to see a yellow line across both screens. And one of those screens is connected to the time when the object was successfully moving. And another screen is tied to when it wasn't moving, the first 6 minutes. And I want you to see how many of these brain waves go higher than that yellow line. Because what you'll see is that when it wasn't moving, some of those waves would pop up above it once in a while. Whereas when it was moving, only the delta wave, the red wave, was popping up, but everything else tended to stay below it. So that's the difference I want you to notice. The other difference, which will show up here in the beginning, is how far away the wavelengths are from each other. They're more spread out during the first 6 minutes when it wasn't moving. And then when I get it to start moving, you'll see that they're all closer together, that they're coalesced, that they're coherent in some way. Of course, again, I don't really know what I'm looking at, but I'm looking for something different, and it shows up here. So look how far away they are from each other while it wasn't moving. Here they are coalesced at the top. Okay, it's a little easier to see while it's sped up. And this might seem a little boring, but this could be onto something big for future research. And you're actually the first ones to see this video publicly. Okay, look at the yellow line. And see the blue and purple lines popping up above the yellow while it's not moving. I think it's stress. I think that's what that's showing, stress. And I reversed the screen on the right just for making it easier to look at the data. Again, look for that blue and purple line to rise above the yellow when it's not moving. On the left side, the purple and blue is generally below the yellow line the whole time. Except for a couple small instances. This is a close-up of the origination points. Just look on the right how things pop up above the yellow line more often. And what you'll notice on the left side is toward the end, a couple of these are going to pop up significantly, and you'll notice the foil stops. It comes to a dead stop after it pops up like that. There we go. It may have been a little boring for you, but for me, I mean, I was almost in tears when I saw that. Thank goodness. I haven't been BSing people for all these years, right? Or myself. For me, finding my own way to reality is really important, not just taking on belief systems. And the last thing I want to do is create my own false belief system and then have it taken away. That's the painful part, right? So that's why it's okay for me to just tell people, yeah, we are heating up the air molecules a little bit inside the glass, because when we do, we get this. When the water is in motion, it's not about the water anymore, it's about what you can do, what we can do when the air is moving. And that's where the PK shows up. That's where you can do things like change the direction or change the speed with your intention on using the breathing technique. But then it's really where these anomalies can occur. And so these are things. It's funny, I was flying back from Portland, still mostly mentally paralyzed, thinking, oh my God, none of this is real. And I was listening to music on the flight home, and I started remembering the anomalies that I'd witnessed so many times and that other people had witnessed. One is that you can improve with time, moving the object faster and easier. So that means it's not purely mechanical. If you get better at it, I mean, there's only one source of intelligence in the room when you're doing PK, right? Well, there might be two, you and the UCC, or there might be limitless, that's philosophy. The other anomaly is the object's motion reflects your level of relaxation and tension. It really does. You might notice this when you take my classes this weekend, that you might get it moving and you realize that it's you, and then you get really excited and then it comes to a dead stop. Because excitement is a form of tension. So it's not just negative tension, but even excess celebration can just stop the effect or change the effect. Also, goats, non-believers, perform worse than sheep or believers. And I've seen this in class many times, where people who, they're just there to sort of prove the whole thing is false or there, and the thing just isn't moving for them. And for everyone else, it's moving just fine. I also say that it's usually the smartest people in the room who have the hardest time doing PK, because the instructions to do PK include relaxing and softening the mind. But the smarty pantses, the intelligent engineers and physicists and neurologists are in there, they're trying to sort out what's happening while they're doing it, which is a different frame of mind. You cannot bring that frame of mind into the process. You have to wait till afterward to think about why it works. But we're all used to thinking all the time, so it's asking a lot of someone to say, don't think about it while you do it. But because that happens, it's like, well, this really does reflect the mind. If you use the same object, the same piece of paper, tinfoil over time, it starts to develop a personality of its own. It's really funny. The first time it happened, it had me asking a lot of weird questions. I had been using the same tinfoil for 2 weeks, and one day, just like every other day, I decided to walk in, and here I had it set up in my kitchen. And as I'm walking through over the threshold into the kitchen, I see it, and it sort of turns to look at me. And it's happened more than once. You use the same target for a long period of time, it can tell what you want to do before you want to do it, which it relates to time and how we think of time, because sometimes it knows what you want to do before you even think, I'm gonna sit down now and practice with this thing. You just look at it and it turns. Because also it relates to the difference between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. It can pick up on what you're subconsciously wanting to do, or your subconscious knows before you consciously know what you want to do, and it responds to that. Also, it'll mess with your ego a lot, because you could spend 20 minutes trying to make it move, and it doesn't move. And then you say, okay, I'm done for the day, and you start standing up to move away, and it starts turning like crazy. So in a way, it's like your miniature spiritual teacher telling you to get over yourself. It can do that. And then when you are strongly entrained with the object, which can happen in about an hour, depending on your state of mind, you can change the speed and direction of it using the breathing technique. Because as we know from every spiritual tradition in the world, the way we breathe affects our energy, whatever energy means. And our energy affects our consciousness, whatever consciousness means. So we can measure changes in the effect based on changes in our breathing and our level of consciousness. So as I remember this on the plane home, I started to breathe a sigh of relief, but then I was still so scared that I didn't touch her for a few weeks until last week. Which brings me back to that night, almost drowning and being scared in the ocean as a child. Praying for something to happen to save us. And I wonder, maybe that was just the natural waves of the ocean, but maybe there was something a little extra happening too. Maybe there's always something a little extra happening in our life. Of course, maybe there can be nothing happening sometimes too, when we're stressed out, or when we just don't give two hoots about something, or whatever. There's always possibilities there, and sometimes they're hard to catch. But when you do PK enough, you start to see little hints here and there in your life. Like maybe you did make something happen, something that you wanted, or maybe something you didn't want. How many stories have I heard about people getting angry and the light bulb in the room exploding, or something like that, or computers burning out, right? We are so connected in ways that we don't understand. And this type of PK for everyone is a way to really give you direct access and show you that you are more than just a physical being, and that life really is sacred in some way.
You're influencing the object, but you're also influencing the heat inside. Now you realize that when the object moves, it would heat up the air a little bit. So it isn't really clear which came first.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. It is a chicken or the egg kind of an issue. And the thing about, there are a couple of things you said, but why I had a meltdown about it just, there's a whole psychological thing about PK and about any psychic experience, and it has to do with survival, I believe. Like, what if it turns out that I've been lying, or if I'm fraudulent, there's a threat of being ostracized, right? Which is, as humans, we know that to survive you need to live in groups, and to be cast out from your group means certain death. At least 100,000 years ago it did, right? So here I am thinking, oh my God, whatever I was presenting, I'm wrong, and I'm going to be cast out from whatever this, it's in our DNA, right? Like survival, acceptance. Anyone here been to therapy? And the importance and the value of acceptance, and somehow we seek acceptance sometimes excessively. And then for me to just flop over and go, okay, now I'm going to go join the skeptics and be like, I'm the guy who proved the PK didn't exist, and there I'll find my acceptance in my community, right? So I won't be cast out. Right? There's a whole psychological dimension to this.
Absolutely. I should share with all of you that Sean called me right after this. You remember that? And he really was upset.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you that you shouldn't be. If you were just to move that, no matter how, the heat would go up. Okay? And I think the two are happening together because of your PK.
Thanks.
So for 40 years I've been asking you questions about how these things are possible, how they actually move, how they don't, when does precognition happen, when doesn't it, how does energy move. I've asked people including Russell Park, Jessica Utz, my first teacher in my 20s, which is a long time ago, and Nassim Haramein. The list is long. We know who worked with, in a second, I'll remember her name in a minute. My tentative opinion is it's not necessarily air, because the energy decreases inversely with the square of the distance. Full stop. You can't do that in the garage easily. Does it have to be electromagnetic? No, it doesn't have to be that way. Over 70% of the universe is dark energy and dark matter, which means we don't know what it is. He can tell you that. Okay? So it can't be energetic necessarily. And produce an effect 5,400 miles away, which I've done. And the student knew exactly what I was doing. It can't be energetic. There's my conundrum. Okay.
Yeah, it's great, because now when I teach the classes, I'd say, okay, I'm going to use the word energy, but that's just a placeholder. I don't know what energy is in this context. I don't know if energy is at play in this context. I don't know how this works. And I love saying that. I don't know how PK works. It's sort of liberating to say it works. There's a technique, but I don't know how. The interesting thing is, Marty, in your presentation this morning, you mentioned chi and prana and all those words for energy. And I know in Chinese medicine or the Chinese tradition, chi actually is defined in different ways. It can be heat. It can be blood. It relates to saliva or other fluids. Electricity. So chi, or the word energy, means so many things, and I think so many things more that we have yet to discover with the rational mind. The thing about this that's interesting, I think about this with the out-of-body experience too, is that we trying to figure this stuff out rationally is like trying to catch mosquitoes with a butterfly net. It's just the wrong tool, right? Somehow we need non-physical tools that are reliable for non-physical study. State-specific research is one way to label that. So there's a lot to go with this, but luckily little little things like these cheap EEG machines are opening doors, and I'm sure they're nicer EEG machines that would reveal a lot more. So, any other questions?
Yeah. Sean, have you found a correlation with Qigong and effects of PK coming out stronger, more effective? And the second question is, when you talk about getting mad, computers will break, light bulbs will burst, things like that. Have you found that maybe when you're doing PK work related to something that's positive, like something that, let's say, all of a sudden positive things start happening, people, let's say you were praying for healing, all of a sudden you get a call, I just got better, or something turned out really good. It might have been in the back of your mind, and the energy just taps into that because it was a positive PK effect.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I'm going to start with the second question, and then maybe you can remind me of the first one. But there's definitely a correlation also with strong positive emotion. This has happened spontaneously, and also when teaching classes where the object is moving at a certain speed or it's having difficulty. And this happened to me, I know in January. I was working with some people that are getting some stuff on video for a movie that's coming out. And I started thinking of my wife. And it's a nice memory, and at that moment the thing burst into movement. And the person I was teaching across the table, she started thinking about a positive memory, and the thing burst into movement for her too. A few weeks ago I was part of an energy healer study, and the method that I was using for that was to generate immense feelings of love using music in my head. And what's interesting is there was someone outside the room monitoring the situation, and the whole environment was quiet. But at one point after one of the sessions, she said, I keep hearing music. And I said, well, I've been like blaring this inspiring music in my head to generate that heart feeling, and that's what I would send to the clients. And then there were physically measurable effects, but I can't disclose them. The study is still ongoing. And then the first question you had? Qigong. Absolutely. When I teach the classes, frequently the Qigong practitioners in the class let me know that they're Qigong practitioners, and they consistently perform better than average. And there's one exercise, there's this one where you're just rotating your hands up and down and just breathing in accordance with that. And you're really doing the microcosmic orbit of energy in the body. And I got that one on video too, and then the object really starts responding to that. So I think anyone who does internal energy work definitely has a leg up on this, and anyone who meditates as well. And of course it's all connected, because if your energy is flowing well and smoothly, you're able to relax to deeper level, and vice versa. If you can relax, then your energy flows better too.
Okay, I just have a couple of quick questions. Was curious about if you felt that PK is related overall to remote viewing, if you feel that it's just a different aspect of the same thing applied a different way. That's the first question.
Oh, that's a great question, because that lets me say something I haven't said yet, and it's just a theory, but it's the information theory. Some people propose that what's behind all of the psychic phenomena is called super psi. It's over everything, this psychic informational connection that we have. So maybe PK is precognition, and maybe remote viewing is, and maybe, and it goes deeper into that, but what could be happening to produce the movement inside the glass container is energy or information transfer, where we're sort of reprogramming reality in that environment. Does that make sense?
The second quick question I had is if you were familiar with the time that Ingo Swann was able to connect with an object that was electromagnetically shielded, and just in comparison, how that form took place in comparison to the movement of the water molecules, and if you had any thoughts about the differences.
Well, I think PK can happen in different ways, which is not a bold statement to make when I have no idea how PK works. But I think there are different ways that can happen. So if we're looking at crossing through an electromagnetic barrier, it could just be, again, information transfer, because then there is no barrier. if we're looking at, I think Ingo Swann also did experiments raising the temperature of fluids in a bottle or changing the temperature. And at that point, is there actually energy going from one location to the next, or again, is it just energy transfer? And back to your first question, that's where it connects with remote viewing, that remote viewing is information transfer, right? Just as a loose theory, I don't know. Hi. We've been spoons last year in a sushi restaurant downstairs.
I've been bending the spoons. So, one of the questions I just wanted you to respond to, the idea that the delta state might actually just be more reflective of you entering into a calm meditative state, that for you personally and for specific types of people, especially coming from the meditation training, that brings you to a calm state where you're able to focus your attention. But other people might be better able to focus their attention in other states. So it's not the delta state that facilitates the effects. It's actually your ability to filter out distractions. So rage can focus your attention to the exclusion of any other intrusive thoughts. So can sex, so can lust, so can joy, but not happiness, right? So if you're feeling happy and you're thinking all these happy things, then you're not as effective. You're trying to bend a spoon and it's not bending, even though you're sending all these happy thoughts to it. But when you have that purity of joy, that'll work, because that really excludes all the distractions. So I'm wondering if, although I think that the work looking at the delta wave effects might be very useful for some individuals as one avenue, I'm wondering if that's not maybe going down the wrong path, because it's a side effect of something else, and so then you're putting that as the cause, and you might accidentally then be obfuscating the actual cause, or the maybe more powerful effects. Because when people have rage, let's say you're talking about blowing out light bulbs, that might be something, you're not going to be in a delta wave in that state, right? But you might have more powerful effects. So it might actually be looking at how do we get into the focused attention without distractions, however you get into that state, whatever emotion, rather than trying to find it necessarily by calm serenity. I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really important statement that you're making, because it relates to future research for sure. And it also prevents this becoming dogmatic, or like this could be a religion in 10 years, right? You don't have to meditate to do this. It's really about finding what is that thing, what gets you there. It might not be meditation. The thing about meditation that I like is it's gentle. Most people can learn how to do it. It feels good when you do it. So it has some nice health benefits too. And it's easily reproducible. You can meditate 10 times in a row and get the effect 10 times in a row. But that's just one factor. What if we ignore that for a moment and go, what really makes it happen? Yeah, intense joy, intense rage can make it happen. Yeah, the point of orgasm is a point of focus, or post-orgasmic effect when our oxytocin is flowing and all the other relaxing hormones and neurotransmitters are flowing. Other things, I can tell you, if you have 2 glasses of wine, you can still do it, and maybe do it a little bit better. Last year I was at a conference in Laughlin. It was actually a UFO conference, and I met this nice young couple from Europe, and they had bought a joint. And they invited me to smoke a joint with them, and I'm not a pot user, but I thought, when in Rome. And so I went outside with them and had a few hits off of this joint. And I'll tell you, marijuana today is different than when I was in college. Because soon they went on their own way, and I was like, great, I'm high, and what am I going to do? And I find my way back to my room, and I mean, the walls and the floor were wavy. I was like, did I smoke mushrooms? Because that's sort of what it feels like. But I thought, now I know what I can do. Well, first I'm going to eat this ice cream that I bought at the gift store. And then I brought a jar with a glass container with me. I'm going to try PK while I'm high and see if I can still do it. And the thing was moving really well. I just don't know if it was really moving or if it was my mind that was moving. But I think there's something really important in your question about if we sit down as a society to study PK, we have to be willing to look outside the box and not just go, okay, everyone meditate, that's all we're going to do is meditate, make it happen that way. No, we're going to meditate, we're going to try different emotional processes, different cognitive processes. Because sometimes, I mean, the one technique that I teach is, it's called the refrigerator technique. When you're trying to do it and it's not working, you imagine going to your kitchen, opening a refrigerator, and taking stock of what's in your fridge with your conscious mind. And then it starts to move. Because you got your big fat ego out of the way. And there's something there about who's in here and who's getting in the way. And who are you really when that other part leaves the room?
Okay, since we're in a casino, have you used your skills on the machines? I took a class way back in the late 80s with this guy who was great at spoon bending and forks and knives, and we all came down here and I actually saw him lock up one of the one-armed bandits where it wouldn't like stop ringing and letting all the money out, and they had to come over and unplug it. Have you tried these things in the casino?
Were you referring to Joe Gallenberger? Is that who you took the workshop with? So.
This was in Portland, Oregon. I can't remember his name. This was back in the 80s. I have no idea.
Well, these days you can hang out with someone named Joe Gallenberger. He's the author of a book called Inner Vegas, and he's written a couple of books actually. And he also teaches out of the Monroe Institute, and he takes people to Vegas and teaches them how to use PK for craps and other things. And at a conference here last year, he popped in to the SSE conference, and he gave some tips. And I used one of them that night, or the next night. I was walking around the casino floor using my body as a dowsing tool, just trying to feel my way and see which machine called me over to it. And just a few minutes later, I find myself thinking, oh, 2 rows down, that one's winking at me. So I went over and dropped a couple quarters in, and I won $70. I thought, okay, Joe, thank you. And one thing happened about a year or 6 months ago. I was up in a casino in Colorado. I thought, I've got some time, I'm going to try this out again. And I walked around the whole casino town. It's very small there. Black Hawk, that's the name of the city. Found myself walking into a casino. Actually, I had to go to the bathroom, so I was just looking for the nearest bathroom. And then I started walking the casino floor again. And this was 11 o'clock in the morning. There's barely anyone there. And I feel called over to a machine. And I walk over to it, and I had my bill ready and had to stick in the thing. But then I saw there was a $50 credit on the machine. I didn't even have to spend money. I just pushed the cash out ticket, went to the cashier, got my $50, and I drove home. So, and that may not be PK, that might be precognition, that might be other sources of, or other types of information gathered psychically. But that back to that night when I won the $70, I also played blackjack that night. And I was sitting with some people from the conference there, and one of them started asking me about my teaching activity. And PK is nice, but my real passion is teaching. Whatever it is, I could teach you to tie your shoes, and I would derive joy from that. And I was feeling really happy talking about teaching with this person. And I realized I was winning hand after hand after hand. Maybe 15, 20 minutes later, he leaves, so I stopped talking about teaching, and I started losing and playing at about a random level of success, right? So there's something, and this is what Joe Gallenberger teaches also, is that opening the heart. Big heart space helps with PK, helps with intentions and expectation and effect and things like that. So.
Okay, we have a question from the webinar. So Ingo Swann seemed to have his strongest successes with PK when he was genuinely interested in the mechanics and structure of an object, such as the nanometer quark detector at SRI, and also in heat experiments with Gertrude Spindler. I hope I said that right. He had marginal effects until he decided he really didn't know the internal workings of a thermometer and decided to just tune into it clairvoyantly, which is when he had his biggest effect. So I'm wondering if you've had examples like this, moments, not just of relaxation, but deciding to tune in with non-local perception to an object, or at least a strong curiosity about how something works, while intending to have a PK effect.
So yeah, that's a great question. And as I mentioned earlier, trying to move the toothpicks. Should I look at the webinar screen? Hi, webinar question. Moving the toothpicks, I was really trying to use a little bit of remote viewing to look into the cellular structure of the wood, and that's when it would start moving. But I think there is something important there about Ingo's interest in the device that he was trying to influence, that there needs to be some sort of desire at a deep level in order to produce an effect. One thing that happened maybe about 3 years ago, I had done the same type of PK for so long, and eventually, even when I would sit down and do the technique, it wouldn't move. Over and over again, it wouldn't move. And I was bored. And I sat down with the intention to do it. Everything was there. I'm sitting down, I'm doing my technique, doing my breathing, I'm relaxing, and it's not moving. And I looked deep, deep, deep down inside my psyche and realized that the flame was not on. A deep, deep, I gotta have it. I want it. I need to know it. It was my subconscious self, my non-ego self, maybe my bigger self, was already satisfied. It had found the answer that it had been looking for. It's like, why are we doing this again? Can we do something new? I'm dying to be finished with PK because I love to play the piano. Actually, that's a personal admission there. But I love teaching PK, so I won't give it up.
I have a very successful paranormal show that I talk a lot on, and I give a lot of my experiences. I've had over 100 different experiences in my life, ranging from keys moving indoors, clock arms moving, floor length mirror cycling around in front of me. I could go on and on and on with the types of experiences I've had. So my question to you would be this: how do you know if it's PK versus something truly paranormal? Because I have been, passionately talking to the world about paranormal. And if I'm doing this myself, just to give you one little tiny example, I was in Zach Bagan's haunted museum here in February, and I was attacked psychically, and it was kind of a bad scene. But in the puppet room, when you're talking about things moving and watching you and turning in your direction, there was actually a puppet that was watching me and following me in that room, and I knew something. I couldn't tell if it was paranormal, and I couldn't tell if it was me. But what's your input or what's your thoughts about how do you differentiate between if it's PK or if it's really paranormal?
Well, thanks for ruining my sleep tonight. There's something interesting about, the doll was looking at you or moving in a certain way and you're not sure if it was you or not. The interesting thing about this type of PK that I teach is maybe let's just say it is random heat in the beginning that's moving the object, but you believe that it's you doing it, and then you actually do it. So again, back to the chicken or egg thing, that something is happening with your interaction with the environment, and you can't quite tell, is it paranormal or is it you? So it's just tough to tell. One question for you: have you ever had a UFO sighting or an encounter with one of those types of beings? Oh, she cleared her throat. Here we go.
I haven't had that yet because I feel I might actually have one. I was standing in my room last night, looking out the window, talking to my husband, and I said, gee, wouldn't it be interesting if we could ever go over to this mountain, because I'm sure there's a UFO sitting there waiting to find me. But I was just thinking that last night, looking for the UFOs in the sky from my room. But no, I'm just a little bit nervous about actually having an encounter with one.
Okay. Well, I'm just wondering if maybe you have had one and just don't know it. And the reason I say that is, if anyone reads Uri Geller's biography, either by him or by Andrija Puharic. I like Andrija's better. It's a little more detailed. Talks about what happened to Uri. A lot of people think Uri's bending the spoon on his own, but in both books, it talks about where he says, this isn't really me, this is them, right? And he had an encounter in childhood, and that's when he would start changing the hands on clocks spontaneously. Everything happened, and he says it was them. And what we do, this type of PK that I do, is just what anyone can do. But so what might differentiate what I do versus what you've experienced might be that extra external influence from some other galaxy far, far away. Who knows? But, I mean, it's something to consider, and I take it seriously.
Thank you, first of all.